Hi, my name is Niccolo Seligmann. I live in Westminster, Maryland. My training is in early music. My primary instrument is viola da gamba, but I have also learned medieval fiddle. In 2011, I went to an early music festival that included a medieval fiddle player named Shira Kamen, and I was so transfixed by her performance that I just needed to play medieval fiddle. I started working with Jeff Noor on Civilization 6 soundtrack that heavily featured both viola da gamba and medieval fiddle. So I had that on my resume. By the time that COVID struck and all session musicians were equally local, I started getting tons of session work for different video game, film, and TV soundtracks. So that's how my medieval fiddle playing got so widely distributed. I mean, it was really enabled by my home studio setup. Being able to record soundtracks in my home was, I mean, that kept me afloat during the pandemic. I love medieval music. I think of that as kind of my home repertoire. So when I'm writing for my medieval ensemble, I'm usually writing in a medieval style. Um, However, when I'm writing for new music groups or if I'm performing acoustic electric music, or excuse me, electroacoustic music, or any other kind of 21st century genre, I find that medieval sensibilities, especially concerning mode and interaction between parts, really it fits well with 21st century aesthetics. So the kind of modal sensibility and treatment of harmony from a drone-oriented perspective that really kind of brings the medieval into the modern in a way that's really audiences really connect with it. As a viola da gambist, I also play a lot of Baroque music. And so the whole idea of recitative plus aria in various sequences, that to me makes a lot of sense as a way of storytelling,
Mm.
communicating plot through recitative in whatever genre, um, having a text-driven recitative style to deliver the plot of the narrative, and then getting more adventurous musically in arias where characters get to sing about their feelings. That kind of pattern of plot, feelings, I think just works really well in terms of telling a cohesive narrative on stage through music. It really depends on the context. So, for the operas, obviously, I'm composing with a narrative. I find that for longer form works, having some kind of narrative to use as scaffolding for what feelings you want to evoke in what order, I find that really helpful. I wrote a score for the 2013 stage play called An Iliad, and I mean it's the plot of the Iliad. So writing, you know, almost 2 hours of solo cello music for this play, I couldn't have written 2 hours of cello music without some kind of emotional scaffolding. So being able to have a plot like the Iliad to write for, that really made a lot of sense. The flip side of that is I also write original tunes for my family Irish band. So with Irish music, it's not necessarily about telling a cohesive narrative over the course of a song. The song
Mm.
has to be rhythmically satisfying because ultimately a lot of it is dance music. It has to have phrases that are the right length because dancers need things in 4 bar phrases, 8 bar phrases.
Or
Um, so if I'm writing for a context like that, I mean, that's just such a different, there are such different needs. They don't need a narrative the way that an opera needs a narrative. I'm a part of 4 full-time ensembles, and then I'm in various other groups for one-off shows. And that is Alchemy, which performs medieval and new music. Concordian Dawn, which mostly does earlier medieval music. um, Magdalena, which performs Renaissance music, and Whirligig, which is the family band, which performs Nordic and Celtic traditional music. As a solo artist, I create electronic music, so whole different aesthetic. It really depends on the context. So for my opera, my 2021 opera, Julie Monster, um, instead of programming all the beats, because I wanted all of the arias to be modern pop genres, and of course, modern pop genres use electronic beats. So, but at the same time, it's set in Baroque France, and French Baroque time, the way timing and time works in French Baroque music is not rigid electronic beats. So for Julie Monster, I actually arranged all the drum samples out on a keyboard so that when you play the keys to play the melodic notes, it will play the drum samples in the right order to create a coherent beat. So that way you can use all of the time fluctuations and sensitivity of French Baroque music, but still have the sound world be modern pop music. For my own solo music, a lot of the beats are pre-programmed and it's synthesizer time, not human time. Um, so it I introduce technology as much as it is needed. So
Okay.
for Fallen Angel, for example, I'm setting it in this kind of post-apocalyptic world where maybe they don't have access to technology. They don't even have access to the technology of a piano. Um, so with that, I wanted to have a less technological approach, more based in acoustic music and medieval aesthetics. So one of the questions was, what made you choose the instrumentation you chose? And for me, I chose voice because voice was I just love writing for voices. Um, it makes sense to me. It's a really easy way to introduce a narrative into whatever music. And so it was the voice plus then the main solely ensemble. And I was thinking to myself, this piece is medieval aesthetic and it is post-apocalyptic. It's taking place in this very outdoor world. The character lives in a self-constructed shack, basically. So it's a very outdoorsy piece, and piano so localizes things indoors and in the kinds of social classes that can afford a piano. The example that I always think of is when people on the internet got mad at Game of Thrones for introducing piano into the soundtrack because it's not medieval. Well, if, the cello isn't medieval either, and that's the main song. But people are willing to suspend disbelief for instruments like cello, violin, E flat clarinet because it it doesn't have the kinds of associations that take it away from a medieval aesthetic the way having a piano would. The text is a poem that I actually wrote in high school. I wrote a lot of poems in high school. And I've since over the years I've edited it to make it more adult and more not adult in terms of adult content, but in terms of adult sensibilities. Um, and this whole idea really stuck in my mind of queer love conquering all. The angel is this queer lover that literally falls from the sky into the bed and into the life of the narrator. And this idea that climate change is going to completely reshape our world in ways that it already is reshaping our world in ways that we can and can't comprehend. And yet, queer love will still be here no matter what. And thinking of that resilience really proved very fruitful in terms of emotionally putting together a piece of music. I composed it in a single day, in one sitting. Now, I did some background work before that. As I said, I wrote the poem in high school, edited it over the years since, and then I actually created a version of this piece that is just the vocal line alone, stemless note heads. So no indication of rhythm, it's just the pitches
Hmm.
overlaid on the text. And I wrote that for a dear friend named Jonathan Woody, who's a fantastic singer. Um, and bass baritone. And I so I had this tune, this piece, kind of in this half finished state. I mean, it's finished in terms of the way a medieval chant is finished, but it's without any information about rhythm or instrumentation or accompaniment or anything. Um, so I had this. I found out about the Soli project so late before the due date. I found out about it, I think, 5 or 6 days before it was due.
Oh,
So
wow.
I was like, well, what do I have lying around that I
Yeah.
can whip up into a fully formed piece? And I had this piece of medieval style monody that I had written for Jonathan Woody. And I was like, well, okay, I need to turn this into something that a MIDI can export because
Mm.
I don't have time. I'm not a good enough singer to be able to make a recording of this piece as is. So I needed to add rhythms and add accompaniment, obviously, because it's for solely, not just for a solo voice. Um, but I was like, all right, this needs to be something that a MIDI export of the Sibelius document can be an intelligible piece as itself without having the benefit of an actual singer delivering the text. That and the time were just sheer deadline that really shaped the piece. And I don't think that's a bad thing. I really relish working towards a deadline. There's one of the questions was how do you know when a piece is done? And my answer to that was when the deadline occurs, um, then the piece is done. Um, and this really, it was shaped by its circumstances in ways that I think are either neutral or positive. I mean, I tend to work fast in general. In 2021, I wrote a 3 hour opera in 23 days. So I am not convinced that the more time you spend on something, the better it will get. And that comes from my career as an improviser too. Um, and in working in traditional music spaces, you know, a lot of these tunes are not tunes that people practice for months and months. They're tunes that are just kind of in your repertoire that you just kind of know. And it is not coming from a place of a high degree of polish. And I think that there needs to be room in classical music for these more kind of raw, less polished and perfect pieces. I'm sure when I listen to Fallen Angel, when it's recorded, I'll think, oh, I should have done this, I should have done that, should have done this. And I think that's a totally healthy and normal feeling to feel about something. And probably something I would still feel even if I spent 8 times as long creating it. In most of my music career, I am a performer. I am newer at composing for other people. I've composed a lot for myself and for the ensembles that I'm in. That's kind of my comfort zone. Composing for other people, especially if I'm not involved in the performance in any way, is much less common for me. So I'm used to collaborating the way a collaborative performer collaborates. And that is you bring what you have to the table and you accept, understand, and love that other people are doing the same. And you just kind of go from there and see what needs arise and whose skills are best suited to meeting that need. So, in the world of composition, when I'm composing for other people, to play if I'm not involved in the performance. I try to communicate as much of kind of what I think is core parts of the piece, and then I choose to accept and love whatever bits of the self of the performers that they bring to the piece. I have no expectation that a piece is going to sound the way it sounded in my head. And I think that's a really liberating thing to free yourself from. Of course, I've had situations where somebody performed my piece and it was so not what I was intending that I thought it didn't really work. But that's pretty rare. Most of the time, if I'm communicating what a piece is aesthetically meant to be like, usually they'll meet me halfway. Performers will meet me halfway. They'll bring of themselves to the piece, but also will respect what I've communicated to them about the piece. A perfect example of this is vocal production. Um, I try to write for singers that I know and that I know their voices. Fallen Angel, I'm imagining a vocal production that is more pop or traditional music influenced rather than like a heavy vibrato bel canto. But if that's the singer that they hire, I'm ready to choose to accept that. In fact, with Fallen Angel, I actually included 4 versions for countertenor slash mezzo soprano, a soprano version, a baritone version, and a tenor version. Because I don't know what singers Sully is going to hire. So I try to make it as universally friendly as possible. As a performer, I feel like I have a sense of what performers need. And I've worked with so many singers. Look, one of the best things I ever did for myself was learn how to sight transpose. Because if a singer says, I need this up a fourth, the correct answer to that is yes, I will do that. So I created it in 4 different versions because I the piece involves open string plucking on the violin and cello. So you can't really just transpose it up a random amount or down a random
Sure.
amount because then it wouldn't be open strings. So I had to really create new versions that still allow for open string plucking while also being in keys that are more friendly to whatever voice type is going to encounter this music. Open strings ring much longer than covered strings, especially on instruments without frets. Um, so I wanted that kind of bell-like open string tone for the section that uses it. Um, and you just wouldn't have that if it were in a key that is not the keys that I submitted for each of the different voice parts. As a performer, I'm gearing up for a whole host of medieval concerts and other early music performances. As a composer, I am gearing up for a super secret, cannot say video game soundtrack. As a composer, I'm also putting together a chamber opera about 14th century trans woman Eleanor Reichner. All we know of Eleanor Reichner is a court case that she was involved with. And so I'm spinning out what little we know of her into a full musical narrative. I'd love to shout out my medieval ensemble Alchemy, Alkemie, that we're Alchemy Music on all our social media. And you can also experience us at alchemy.org. That's Alkemie. They're my main booze. I love them.
Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this interview and want to see more like it, check out the 30 by 30 by 30 playlist on our channel. For more information about the 30 by 30 by 30 project, check out the website linked to the right.